What's up, YouTube? This is 82 Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about the 1980s Milwaukee Bucks. Now, this is one of the most forgotten teams in NBA history, because oftentimes in sports you only remember the teams that win. You all remember the 80s Celtics, the 80s Pistons, the 80s Lakers, obviously, but how many people remember those Bucks teams? The teams that couldn't quite cut it, you know? So we got to go back a little bit. Now, this may sound kind of weird, but the Milwaukee Bucks were probably, I'd say, in my mind, the fourth best franchise in NBA history at this point if we go to 1975. You know, after the Lakers and Celtics, obviously, and Warriors. So they had a lot of good potential. They were pretty good in the early 70s. They were only created in 1969. And Kareem Abdul-Jabbar led them to a championship. They had guys like Oscar Robertson, Bob Dandridge. And a lot of people thought that this Bucks team is, due to their perennial success that they had in the 70s, like constant uh, playoff appearances, that this could be a team that could potentially, in the future, win multiple championships, even after Kareem. Now, Kareem was having troubles in Milwaukee, being that he's a Muslim and political differences. He wanted a bigger market to play in. So he demanded a trade. He said, either trade me to LA or New York. And he ended up getting traded to the Los Angeles Lakers. But I do want to mention, though, I think the Bucks did okay for what they got in return. Obviously, they didn't win a championship out of it right away. But on June 16, 1975, they traded him for Elmore Smith, Junior Bridgman, Brian Winters, and David Myers. I don't think it's the worst trade on their end. The trade triggered a series of events that led to a change in the team's ownership. Minority owner and cable television executive Jim Fitzgerald opposed the trade and wanted to sell his stock. Although Fitzgerald was the team's largest single holder, he did not own stock and control of the team. So he saw it like, okay, we're out. We're not going to win. I'm out. But, it kind of surprised a lot of people how well they did after Kareem. They had several, at first though, initially, they had several transition seasons. But most of the players would go on to help the team. After being sold to Fitzgerald's and several partners in 1976, the Bucks would enter in another era of greatness. It began with Don Nelson, who became the head coach in November 1976, after Larry Costello abruptly resigned. In the 1977 draft, the Bucks had 3 first-round picks. They drafted Kent Benson, Marquise Johnson, and Ernie Grunfeld. Johnson would become the staple for the Bucks for years to come. While rookie Sidney Moncrief made his debut in 1979, Don Nelson went on to win 2 NBA Coach of the Year awards with the Bucks. And they also won division titles in 1983 and 85. So let's talk about this 80s team, right? From 1979 to 1990. There they would win 6 straight division titles and have 500 plus seasons for the next 11 years. Within those years, the Bucks became the perennial Eastern Conference contenders, primarily due to the strong play of Moncrief, Marquise Johnson, Paul Presley, Junior Bridgman, and the arrival of Craig Hodges, Terry Cummings, Ricky Pierce, Jack Sigma from trades from the Los Angeles Clippers and Seattle Supersonics, respectively. However, the Bucks were unable to make it to the NBA Finals. And I want to talk about this. So let's first look at some of their players, right? Because I feel like their players are pretty forgotten. Marquise Johnson. I'm going to start with him, okay? He played with the Bucks from 1977 to 1984, and his averages with the Bucks is 21 points per game, 7 rebounds, and 1.3 blocks. Now, his best season with the Bucks, I think, was in the 78-79 season, where he had 25 points, 7 rebounds, 1.2 blocks, and 1.5 steals. He's a 5-time All-Star, 3-time All-NBA. He played with the Bucks until the 83-84 season. Now, let's look at every season individually as we look at these players. So, the 79-80 season, they went 49-33. Like I said, they had Marquise Johnson, leader of the pack. They had a guy named Junior Bridgman, who many people more so know him as a businessman rather than an NBA player, but he himself was not a scrub. He played 10 seasons with the Milwaukee Bucks, putting up 13 points per game. Not a scrub at all. Very efficient scorer. Then they had an aging Bob Lanier. They had Brian Winters putting up 16 points per game. Like I said, Bob Lanier was there putting up 15 points per game. Sidney Moncrief was just a rookie at this point. But let's get into the 80-81 season, right? The team would improve to 60-22. Their coach was Don Nelson and their executive was Don Nelson. By this time, Sidney Moncrief would start to step up. This team, for the most part, had the same roster. Johnson, Bridgman, Lanier. But Moncrief was starting to prove that he himself was the best player on the Bucks. In my opinion, he was the best player of the 80s Bucks. His best average came in the 82-83 season, where he averaged 22.5 points per game, 3.9 assists, and 1.5 steals. Now, you may never heard of Moncrief, but he's a 5-time All-Star, 5-time All-NBA, 5-time All-Defensive First, and get this, he's a 2-time Defensive Player of the Year. Probably the best lockdown defender of his era. Okay? Some people would say Jordan. Jordan became a better defender in the 90s, I'd say, as far as perimeter defense. Yeah, Jordan won a Defensive Player of the Year too in 88, but I would say, maybe this is a hot take here, just from what I've watched, okay? I'd say Sidney Moncrief was a better defender. I'm not saying he was a better player, obviously, but all around. But now let's just show you an example of how good he was on the defensive end. Now, in this era of defensive bigs, for example, he was 8th in defensive win shares in 1984. That's how good he was. And okay, so they went 60-22. They were the 3rd best defensive rated team, 2nd best rated offensive team. What happened? Well, they lost to the Philadelphia 76ers in 7 games in the first round. And it's crazy because the 7th game, they only lost by 1 point. The Sixers won 99-98. Talk about a heartbreaking loss. And you can't really blame Moncrief. You can kind of blame him. He went 4 for 10. He's probably living with that the rest of his life. If I would have made one more shot, I would have got out of the first round. But anyways, Following that season, 81-82, they went 55-27. They posted the league's best defensive rated. They were the first in defense, and they were ninth in offense. And Sidney Moncrief upped his scoring to 19 points per game. Marquise Johnson had 16. Brian Winters had 15. Bob Lemire had 13. Junior Bridgman had 12. But again, they lost to Philadelphia 76ers in the first round. Now, the 82-83 season. This is what a lot of people remember them for. They swept the Boston Celtics, who were favored to win that series. They were a 56-win team in the first round. That's how good this team was. You know? And it's unfortunate that they didn't keep Marquise Johnson. But I think what they were going with is they wanted... I don't want to say Marquise Johnson was a bad offensive player. That's not what I'm saying at all. Obviously not if he scored 25 points per game. But I think they wanted a younger player. Now, on September 29th, 1984, the Bucks traded Junior Bridgman, Harvey Ketching to the Los Angeles Clippers for Terry Cummins, Craig Hodges, and Ricky Pierce. Now, Ricky Pierce pretty much immediately took over that role from Junior Bridgman. And now Ricky Pierce, okay, I mentioned how good of a defender Sidney Moncrief was. But Ricky Pierce himself was a very great defender. Great perimeter defender. And not only that, he was a great efficient scorer. He was a shooting guard putting up 53% field goal shooting, for example, in 1987. And he's a 2-time Six-Man of the Year with the Milwaukee Bucks. And he actually made an All-Star appearance with them in 1991. But I think the meat and potatoes of that trade was when they acquired Terry Cummins. Now, Cummins was a 2-time All-Star, 2-time All-NBA. He was the 1983 Rookie of the Year. I think, if somebody wants to throw their insight down below, that'd be great. But I think what this Milwaukee team was doing was they wanted to go younger, maybe. And Terry Cummins is probably one of the most forgotten All-Stars in NBA history. He the 84-85 season, his first full season there, he made an All-Star appearance. He put up 23 points per game, 9 rebounds, 1.5 steals. And get this, right? This Milwaukee team in 84-85 went 59-23. They were the second best defensive rated team, 6th best offensive rated team. They beat the Chicago Bulls in the first round before losing to the Sixers in 4 games. And in my opinion, this is the best Bucks team of the 80s. Yes, they don't have the best record, but I think this was their best overall team. Like I said, they had Terry Cummins with 23 points. Sidney Moncrief was putting up 21 points per game, shutting everybody down on the perimeter. Now, you want to know how many guys averaged more than 1 steals? Craig Hodges averaged 1.2 steals. Paul Presley averaged 1.6 steals. Sidney Moncrief averaged 1.6 steals. Terry Cummins averaged 1.5 steals. And Craig Hodges was a great 3-point shooter. They also had, other good role players like Alton Lister, Mike Dunleavy. This was a great team. One of the most forgotten teams of all time. Now, going into the 85-86 season, they would go 57-25. They'd defeat the New Jersey Nets in the first round in 3 games. They'd defeat the Philadelphia 76ers like a revenge tour almost. You can't write this stuff, man. Get this. Remember I told you how the Sixers defeated them by 1 point in that Game 7? Well, this time they got them by 1 point in Game 7. They defeated them 113 to 112. I'd encourage anyone to go on YouTube and watch this game. It's probably, in my opinion, one of the most classic playoff games of the 1980s. Sidney Moncrief went 9 for 16, put up 23 points. Terry Cummings had 27 points, and Craig Hodges had 24 points. Ricky Pierce off the bench had 16 points. And it was a choke job by the Sixers, realistically. I mean, the Sixers at this point had Charles Barkley. They should have won it, to be honest. Then on the conference finals, the Celtics would get their revenge. This time they would sweep the Milwaukee Bucks. Now by the 86-87 season, get this, they defeat the Philadelphia 76ers in 5 games in the first round. Then they lose to the Boston Celtics in 7 games. And they would only lose by 6 points to the Boston Celtics. But this time they had a different... This time they kind of updated their roster. I mentioned earlier in the 80s they had Bob Lanier as their classic center, right? But this time they had Jack Sigma. And I think a lot of people forget about how good Jack Sigma was. Now, he was originally playing with the Supersonics. And by the time he came over to Milwaukee in 86-87, he was 31 years old. He put up 12.7 points per game, 10 rebounds per game, 1.1 blocks per game. He was starting to kind of decline. But for his Sonics years, for example, at his peak, he put up 16.8 points per game, 10.8 rebounds per game. He'd never make an all-star appearance on the Bucks, unfortunately. He was a perennial all-star on the Sonics, making 7 all-star teams. He was a 1982 all-defensive second team. He's a 1979 NBA champion with the Seattle Supersonics. Yes, you heard that right. The Sonics won a championship. That's something a lot of people forgot. But his tenure with the Bucks, he'd play with them up until 90-91. He'd put up 13 points and 7 rebounds. So, this shows you how many good players they had. Who else did they have on this 87 roster? They had the usual guys I mentioned, Terry Cummings, Ricky Pierce. But now they had John Lucas. And I think John Lucas was the 3rd best scorer that year. He put up 17.5 points per game. And he had 6.7 assists, 1.7 steals. So they always found throughout the 80s on this Bucks team players that hustled on defense. Got a lot of steals. And the thing about this Bucks team, when you watch them, they played very great team defense. They were great at ripping the ball from people. They got a lot of passing lane steals. That's how they were so good defensively. And this 87 team, they were the 4th best defensive rated team too. And like I said, even John Lucas was starting to step up and get a lot of steals. There was always quite a few players on their teams that averaged more than a steal per game. John Lucas would only play up until the 87-88 season, which brings me to the next season. This year would be kind of their downfall. They went 42-40. Now, this, in my opinion, is because of injuries. I mean, Sidney Moncrief only played 56 games that year. So, it is what it is. They'd lose in the first round to the Atlanta Hawks in 5 games. Now, the 88-89 season, the Milwaukee Bucks would go 49-33. And I do want to note I think another factor in why they declined wasn't just so much injuries as coaching changes. Because by 87, 88, they had Coach Dale Harris. And in my opinion, I mean, I don't think anybody's going to dispute me on this. He's no Don Nelson. And 88, 89, they would go 49 and 33, like I said. They were still one of the best defensive teams. They were the sixth best defensive rated team, but they would lose in the second round to the Detroit Pistons in 4 games. And at this point, their core was starting to get older. Moncrief was 31, Presley was 30, Sigma was 33. So their window of opportunity was closing. Now, coming into the 89-90 season, they'd go 44 and 38, losing to the Chicago Bulls in the first round. They would lose 3-1. And this is when they would switch things up. Remember when I said they get a lot of good perimeter defensive players? Well, Alvin Robertson they would have on this team. And there's certain circumstances why people have erased him from their mind. I'm not going to get into it. But he was traded to the Bucks for Terry Cummings. So the Spurs would take Terry Cummings, and the Bucks would get Alvin Robertson. But he himself was a 4-time All-Star, 3-time Steel Champion, 6-time All-Defense, 1986 Defensive Player of the Year, and he's the 1986 Most Improved Player. So, in 1991, in this first season with the Bucks, he put up 13.6 points per game, 5.7 rebounds per game, 5.5 assists, and 3 steals. And he played 81 games. And I think what they were going for is they wanted to go back, in my opinion, to having... Sorry, I don't mean to pause so much, but I think they wanted to go back to just having a lot of good perimeter defenders. And, Moncrief was on his last knees. He didn't even play anymore. So I think this team was trying to make a decent roster, something to compete, Because Sidney Moncrief was gone at this point. He retired because of knee injuries in the 89-90 season. His knees were just killing him. And it's kind of sad because he would return in the 90-91 season, but it wouldn't even be for the Milwaukee Bucks. He would sign a contract with the Atlanta Hawks. And so as I'm talking about this 91 Bucks team, Moncrief wasn't on it. So they would lose, despite going 48 and 38, they'd lose in the first round to the Philadelphia 76ers. And that's where I'll end it. I don't want to go on when it's supposed to be about the 80s Bucks. The next season, I'll just say they went 31 and 51. And they were kind of abysmal throughout the 90s. But let's talk in retrospect here. Okay? They had a great winning percentage through the 80s. They made a playoff appearance every year from 1980 to 1991. And in my opinion, they're the most underrated team of that decade. Yes, they never won a championship. But these were deep teams, man. They had lots of great players. They had lots of ways to attack you. Like I said, Moncrief, Johnson, Bridgman, Bob Lanier. Even later on, if you want to say Alvin Robertson, even though he wasn't part of that core, Ricky Pierce. So, why aren't they mentioned as much? Small market teams kind of tend to be forgotten, too. They don't get everybody talks about the Lakers, the Knicks. People don't remember small market teams. Casual fans is what I'm saying. They don't remember small market teams as much, especially when they don't win. And this is a team that went head-to-head with Michael Jordan. They went head-to-head with Charles Barkley on the Sixers. Moses Malone on the Sixers. Julius Erving. Boston Celtics, the Detroit Pistons. And I consider this the last time. I mean, I know recently the Eastern Conference has been getting deeper. But in the 80s, the Eastern Conference, no doubt in my mind, was the better conference overall. I mean, come on. You really only had the Lakers as contenders. Yes, the Rockets made the finals twice, but I think the Lakers are the only team that you ever feared come out of the West. In the 80s, you had the Bucks, you had the Bulls, you had the Celtics, you had the Sixers, you had the Pistons. I'm sure I'm even forgetting some teams. Oh, the Hawks. The Knicks even had a good run, I think, in 88. Or not necessarily a playoff run, but they started becoming a playoffs or a winning team, winning like 50-something games. So, I didn't even mention the Cleveland Cavaliers of the 80s. So, the market was saturated, so to speak. And especially when all these other teams kept getting better around them, it's hard to win. And especially injuries, too. And in my opinion, Sidney Moncrief, and I was really happy when he got inducted in the Hall of Fame in 2019. I thought it should have happened much sooner than that. In my opinion, he was a first ballot Hall of Famer. I'm sorry. I know a lot of people are going to disagree with me, but go watch highlights of that guy. So that's the story of the 1980s Milwaukee Bucks. Let me know what you guys think down below. Thanks for watching.